There's something happening here.
All right, Jamie Clark here with episode 9 of Lexington Behind the Curtain podcast. And today we've got the distinguished Dr. Ryan Stanton. And Ryan, the whole concept of the podcast, and this goes back a little over 20 years. In 2003, I was an ambassador for Lexington Chamber of Commerce, and we did a fly-in to Washington, D.C., and we took 250 business and community leaders, and we met with Senator Bunning and McConnell and all those folks, and we talked about issues that were relevant to Lexington, but kind of on the national scale. And we're in this room, and it's all 250 of us, and I'm looking around. Of course, as an ambassador, I was kind of helping coordinate direct traffic. And I'm looking around the room, and I'm like, there's 500,000 people in Lexington metro area, but the 250 people in this room are what's moving the needle. You know, they're the ones they're driving the community forward. And for years, I've often thought, you know, how do we highlight that group of people that are doing that? And that's what this podcast is. You know, episode 2, I had Stuart Perry on, and Stuart's a huge volunteer in town. He's been on or founded, you know, about half the nonprofits. And we were talking about only 3% of the population ever volunteer for a nonprofit organization. So there's a small percentage of folks like yourself that are really driving Lexington forward. And I call this shining a light on good people doing great things, you know. So if you would, give us a little bit of your resume and who you are and how you got here and where you're from. And we'll kind of talk a little bit more about Lexington and all the cool things you're doing.
Well, I mean, with the idea of good people doing great things, my daughter over here would probably say I'm an okay person doing all right. Keeping the roof over the head kind of folks. Yeah, I'm Ryan Stanton. I'm an emergency physician. I'm actually double boarded in emergency medicine and EMS medicine.
What's the difference?
Well, so emergency medicine is going to be your brick and mortar based, theoretically brick and mortar based, but it really is everything emergency medicine.
Right.
It is a specialty. So when somebody comes in the emergency department and they say, is emergency medicine all you do? Yeah. Yes, I am board certified in being in that department, taking care of emergencies. And so that is a specialty, and it has been for a little over 50 years now. And, you know, that's the key, is that training in that acute phase of care, that first 2 to 3 hours of an emergency.
Yeah.
Stabilizing, dispositioning, wherever it needs to be. Then EMS is a newer one. It's only about 15 years old. And that was geared towards the physicians that are medical directors for EMS agencies and giving them the specialized training. So it's emergency medicine. And then you add some of the EMS specific stuff to it. So it's a sub-board of emergency medicine. And it basically is looking at disaster preparedness, managing an EMS agency. And so I got that one in 2019. So I've been boarded in emergency medicine since 2009. And then 2019 is when I became, technically I guess it's 2021 because I don't have to do it until 2031 again. So
now as EMS, they've got more liberties than a doctor in a hospital, right? Because I mean, they're at the scene of a crash. They've got to save that person's life no matter what.
Not necessarily.
Really?
It's just that your typical emergency physician is used to being inside the confines of the emergency department.
Right, and having the luxuries of all the equipment and tools available to them.
Exactly.
That you
so
won't
emergency
have
medicine, though, you have those opportunities elsewhere. There's emergency physicians, like the medical director of Shark Week is an emergency physician, Ben Abo, and he's an EMS medical director out of Florida. One of the great wilderness medicines, Ben Mattingly, who does a lot of education on that. He's an emergency physician, so a lot of the wilderness-based medicines on how do you do healthcare on top of Mount Rainier. You have emergency physicians that are medical directors for marathons, Boston Marathon, New York Marathon. And so emergency medicine depends on where you are. It's just that extra training.
Right.
So with me, I don't necessarily have to have the EMS medical director label, but since I'm the medical director for the largest EMS agency in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, which is Lexington, then I wanted to have that extra training and education to be able to guide that. And very few people realize that Lexington does have the largest single department of EMS in the Commonwealth. And so why not Louisville or Northern Kentucky? Well, it's because they have separate departments. If you go to Louisville, there's still very much that smaller town within a town feel.
Yeah, I'm from Louisville, and I was on the volunteer fire department in Louisville, in downtown. Like, they still have volunteer fire departments scattered throughout the city, which a lot of people don't realize.
And the vast majority of firefighters in the country are volunteer. I still think it's about 2/3 are volunteer, depending on where you are. But Lexington is, with the consolidation of the Lexington Fayette County, everything consolidated, and you have fire, EMS is all one. And so all of our firefighters are EMTs, which is very consistent with most professional fire departments. And then I'd say about 60% of them are paramedics as well.
Okay.
So they've taken that next step and they've served on the ambulances. Currently, we have 12 here in Lexington. Should be about to have 13. We can flex up to about 20 when it gets really busy.
I was going to say, I'm surprised we have that few, because being on the Winchester Road corridor, we get ambulances about every 15 minutes.
We passed one on when we about turned in here. And so the thing is, each ambulance does about 4,000 runs per year.
Wow, that's a lot.
And so you can think that now we're at 48,000, 50,000. That's why you see so many. And the challenge is we can cover now. And the reason we can cover is because a lot of our fire trucks, every station that's here in Fayette County that, it's Lexington Fire, has an ALS truck in it, meaning a truck that has a paramedic on it. Okay. So most of our fire trucks, so they are our first responder trucks. And so if you call 911, you may get a fire truck first.
Right.
In fact, you're likely going to get a fire truck first. And that has a paramedic on it or two, and they stabilize care. Then once the ambulance gets there, they take over care, then transport you to the hospital. In fact, to help reduce some of the calls, we've decreased some of the responses of the ambulance because we found that very rarely did it actually have a patient involved. One was slumped over the wheel.
Oh, yeah.
Or responsive, because people go by and they see somebody sleeping on the sidewalk or sitting around, and they call, and it's not a patient. So we saved the ambulance to high times when we think there's going to need to be a patient that's involved with it.
We do a similar amount of triage at work. We have what we call junior technicians for our service department, and then field supervisors. And the junior guys, they're going out on things like your drains clogged or your filters, whatever. And if they get in there and they find something that is larger than their scope of reference, they call for backup and we send somebody else. And that allows us to take care of more people, because with the employee shortage these days, having a stable of service technicians is just not realistic. So we're hiring guys out of high school and getting them trained as apprentices and then leveling them up. And it's so much better than hiring somebody from another company that might have bad habits that you've got to inherit. And if we start them out of high school, we train them our way and we train them the right way. And we train for the soft skills. Thank you. May I help you? Our guys are supposed to bring your trash cans in if they're there when your trash cans get emptied. Those little things like that we coach on. So it's important to make sure your entire team is making sure everybody's efficient as they can be, right?
David's over there taking notes right now. Synergy needs to come over every Thursday
and take
trash cans in.
So I now have my driveway is 400 foot long.
Ours is very similar.
Yeah,
so it's right at a 1/10 of a mile, and
my kids whine about it, but it's part of their chores. They get paid to do it.
And that's how we do. That's what we like with Lexington Fire too. Is training from the base up. We have occasionally some lateral transfers. Mm-hmm. So folks from outside agencies that will come in. And then they go through some of the onboarding process, but not everything. They don't have to go through the entire paramedic class. But what they'll do is they'll go through, typically what we do is we have the recruit class that comes through, and they go through the entire fire school. That's where they get their EMT, they get their firefighter, all of that stuff, that basic stuff, the general to become a firefighter. And then once they graduate and they have time on, then they can apply to go to paramedic school.
Okay.
And so for the most part, I would say probably 95%, if not more, probably more than that, of our paramedics and firefighters are homegrown.
Well, they get pay bumps every time they get extra certification.
Well, they get pay bumps, and of course the retirement, the union, their ability to, it really is a really tight-knit family, and there's a lot of pride in being in there, and they really do take care of each other.
I loved being on the fire department. It was like a fraternity. I only did it for a couple of years, and I did it while I was still in high school. We were cadets. But it was a lot of fun.
That was before I moved up to Kentucky when I was in Tennessee in medical school. I was part of it. I was a volunteer firefighter. Yeah. And my brother and I were the main ones that drove the apparatus.
Oh yeah.
Because we were probably the only two that were over 21 and had our license in good standing. And so we did a lot of the driving. And that was before GPS. And so I still remember one of the first calls I went out on it's a gas odor inside a gas station. Not the ideal place for a gas odor.
No.
And my brother had responded. I grabbed the truck and started responding. And everything there was listed as gray. because everything it's Gray, Tennessee is
Oh, okay.
the city,
Yeah.
and so there's Gray Station, Gray. I mean, everything. There's
Yep.
like 17 roads have the same thing. So I look on the map and I see this thing, and I go hauling down the road. And when I mean hauling down the road, it was like a 1968 truck that topped out at 45 miles per hour. And so there was really no reason for lights and sirens, but you turn them on anyway. And I go by and get on the interstate, and all of a sudden there's a truck beside me honking, and it was the gas station that was right at the top of the hill, and I had just gone blasting by,
Oh, wow.
and had gotten on the interstate, and then had to turn back around and come back. Thankfully, there was nothing going on there, but yeah, my tenure there, that was probably the highlight, other than a couple of good barn fires. That was the highlight of me just blasting by at 45 miles per hour.
Being in the middle of nowhere as a fireman.
Mm-hmm.
So tell us about your NASCAR stuff, because I mean that's we're friends on Facebook, and I always love the pictures of you, in the full suits and all this stuff. I mean, not anybody can be Dr. NASCAR, right? It's pretty cool.
Yeah. So right now I'm the medical director for GMR Motorsports, which we cover NASCAR, USF, which is an open wheel. It's minor leagues of IndyCar.
Okay.
We work very closely with the IndyCar safety team. Great people over there. And then SRX, which is a series, Superstar Racing series that was on, that they just folded, or at least closed up their doors, and may transition to the IROC series. And then some others here and there. And so, I grew up in East Tennessee. I was originally from Atlanta, Georgia. Moved to Tennessee when I was 8 or 9 years old. And first race I ever went to was Bristol Motor Speedway. And as a Boy Scout, you got to go, if you wore your uniform, you could go into the race for free. And it was one of the support races. It wasn't, because, at that point it was probably one of the Busch races, or trucks didn't even exist then. And you go in for free. Fell in love with it. Just sitting up there as high as you could at Bristol Motor Speedway at that point. It only held 50,000 people. It capped out at one point at about 170,000 people. But you just sat there, and I just loved it. It's one of those very few sports. If you've never been to a NASCAR race, it's a sport that actually engages all of your senses at the same time.
There's so much energy.
It's the smell, the sound, the sights, the feel. The ground is shaking as those cars come by.
And the people watching is amazing.
And the people watching, we had the human bowling ball, and that could be a story for another time on the human bowling ball. But we were there. I loved it. And when we moved here for residency at the University of Kentucky, there's the opportunity. University of Kentucky Emergency Medicine had the contract for Kentucky Speedway.
Oh, cool.
And they said, hey, we know you love NASCAR. You've done a year of surgery internship, so you can get your resident license. So I got my license, and they said, why don't you come up here? There's basically 3 of us. And interestingly, one of them is now the founder of Alpha Event Medicine, Dr. Brian Adkins, and then Dr. Seth Sterling. We became the 3 that, as he was residents, and I was a resident, and then we had a couple of attendings. But for about 10 years, the 3 of us just did that.
Okay.
As part of our event medicine, because they said, hey, I remember the message, why don't you come up and do this, because it's not basketball, so not a lot of them want to do it.
Right.
But you make money. There's more money than you make as a resident, and you can come up here, and it's a pretty fun time.
Yeah.
And so we had a great time and fell in love with it, built relationships with NASCAR, their nurse liaisons, which are the nurses they hire. And one of them actually used to live here in Kentucky and work at St. Joe's. And we just all became friends. And then when I left UK and started working at other facilities, then I had, that I moved in through my association with the American College of Emergency Physicians. A good friend there was the medical director at Talladega Superspeedway. And so then he offered for me to go down there and work some shifts. And then when this team, the traveling safety team, which is through American Medical Response and the Global Medical Response, came about, they were looking for physicians they could bring in to be on track, but weren't taking the medical director from the track. They didn't want to rock the boat and start taking people's medical directors. And so NASCAR and Pam, who was one of the main nurses there, said, hey, why don't you call Dr. Stanton? He has a lot of experience, and he's not a medical director to track, but he has a lot of experience. So I jumped on, and I was one of the 4 original physicians that got invited to do the long term. And right now I've got about 6 or 7, 8 physicians that we regularly call on to fill all the holes that we have with NASCAR and the other series. And in fact, today I was supposed to be, no, it's tomorrow now. I was supposed to be up at Indy covering one of the prep races for the Indy 500. And but now we cover all those series. We have about 12 paramedics that work with us and cover as well.
Say you have to have a pretty big field of people, because if you have a bad wreck, right, a lot of people are hurt at the same time.
Relatively small. We still use NASCAR. Still leans on the local healthcare quite a bit. So a lot of paramedics, firefighters, they're physicians in the in-field care center. We are the on-track response. So when you see a wreck and you see the red, white, and blue, you see the AMR safety team. Yeah. They'll mention us on each broadcast. That's us. Right. That's what we do. And so I've got the big red, white, and blue, and jumping on board there. And it's a blast. I love it. Yeah. The reason I love it is emergency medicine is incredibly stressful, not because of the patients as much as more all the stuff around medicine right now. Yeah. And so for me, as fast as them going 190, 200 miles an hour and having those hideous wrecks is still zero stress comparatively, because I'm used to the trauma. That's not a big deal. They're all healthy. I'm only dealing with usually one person at a time, as opposed to they may have wrecked maybe 5 or 6 of them, but only maybe one of them is going to be hurt if they're hurt. And then getting to work with the series and just kind of the nuance, the challenge of knowing that you're under the ire of 20,000 cameras. Even if it's not the TV cameras, it's somebody with their cell phone who's immediately going to put it on X or immediately going to put it on Facebook. And everybody thinks they can do your job better than you can. Oh, yeah. It's the best. You look at it right after an incident's happened, and you look at all the comments.
You can't do
how many people are experts at what we do? When
my wife goes down the rabbit hole, like when WLEX or ABC or whatever posts something on Facebook, and she'll go down and read the comments. I'm like, that is where trolls go to die. You can't read those. It's going to lower your faith in the human race.
Well, I do that for sure. I do that with all my TV stuff and radio stuff. Mm-hmm. I never read the comments because it's rarely volume. If it's a friend of mine, somebody I trust, they text me or whatnot. I mean, even like this, especially during the beginning of COVID, I got a death threat email out of Florida. Wow. Because I'd been on radio and they heard it, what I was talking about, and they actually sent me a death threat.
That's crazy.
I was like, you're sending doctors a death threat. You really got something.
I've only had one death threat in my whole life, and it was we were drilling for geothermal in eastern Kentucky, and the Friends of Coal got involved in some other stuff. And I had a fairly prominent businesswoman stand up in a room full of about 30 other people and say, I hope your healthcare is in good shape if you continue down this path. I'm like, wow, you just threatened me.
That's awesome, especially if it's something that's actually recorded and you have it's like, by the way.
I mean, there's 20 people in the room. Yeah.
If anything happens to Jamie and Clark, we can just go back to that thing. Hey, we know where it came from.
So I take it you've probably been in a couple cars. What's the fastest you've been around the track?
The fastest I've ever been around the track was I had a rental vehicle that we were using as a chase vehicle at a track that we got up to about 137.
Okay. With you driving?
With me driving.
All right.
Most of the time we use trucks. So for most of my series now, we use some version of an F-150.
I figured you'd talk one of the drivers into putting you in a car.
I've gotten arranged to do some of those racing experiences, but I never did it.
I did it last year at Kentucky Speedway, and I got up to about 156, which was pretty cool. But you have a plexiglass windshield, so it feels so much faster, I mean, I had a Honda Prelude when I was a young, dumb kid, and it went way too fast. And I had it up to 150 on I-65. The statute of limitations is long past, so anybody that's watching. But it didn't feel nearly as fast as 156 with no proper windshield.
Well, and the fact that when you're there, not only do you feel the air, but when you come up to the turn, it looks like it's coming up because of the banking. Yeah. And so your windshield, you see the pavement. So it's like you pan your camera down and you're looking down at the road and you can see how fast it goes. Because when we're at one of the larger tracks, Talladega or Daytona, when I'm looking out of the back of my vehicle, I can't see the horizon. All I can see is track.
Just the bank. In front of me. Especially Daytona.
And then you look out the left, all I see is the bottom of the track. So for me, the only way I see air or sky is looking out the back. And in the front's vice versa. They may be able to see a little bit of sky going around the turn, but you typically have to bend your head. Because, interesting, this year, our trucks have a tilt. It'll show you what your angle is on them.
Okay. I had that in a Jeep one time.
And, of course, Daytona and Talladega, they're over 30 degrees. And so I was looking up what's the brake. I was sitting there in the back of the truck, and, got the Google machine, got time. what's the brake point, the lateral brake point for a roll of a Ford F-150? And there was nothing official, but on all the Reddit boards and everything else, it's like, well, the brake point is going to be 20 to 25 degrees. And I was looking at that. I was looking up in front of us, and it's 31.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, well, we know it can at least do 31, and it holds it okay.
Yeah.
Now, we do have to be careful when we get out of the vehicle. If we open the door, which we typically don't, we'll go high side, crawl out the window. If we push off or close the door, the back end will start to skid down the track.
Wow.
Especially if it's wet. So, it's interesting. You don't realize how steep that is until you try to stand or move or function on 30 degrees. And so, a lot of the armchair quarterbacks would say, well, how awkward it looks when we're getting out of the vehicle, getting onto the track, walking around, somebody stumbles or falls. Well, there's no flat surface other than road courses. There's no flat surfaces on a track. Even the front stretch and back stretch is banked. But then if you get into a turn and it's 30, 32 degrees, that's difficult to walk on the best of times, much less if you have anything else. And so that is one of my major motivations, exercising, working out, being fit, being able to jump walls and stuff, is because I don't want to look like an idiot on TV. I want to look like an idiot as little as possible.
That's a good motivation.
I know that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I don't want to be the one that's in a highlight reel. I don't want to be the one that that NBC or Fox turns into a meme.
I dropped a little over 50 pounds in the last 18 months. And part of it was we filmed a TV commercial in here one day. And I was like, oh, something's gotten out of hand. I got to do something about that. And then I had a horseback riding accident that I got pretty badly hurt. And I was like, okay, it's time to do something. And for years, I'd been trying to lose weight through exercise. I'm a cyclist. And when I was racing for pedal power 15 years ago, I could eat lard with a spoon and not gain weight. So I kept trying to get back on the bike, and I was never really successful. Well, last year I couldn't exercise. So I got really hardcore into intermittent fasting, and it was life-changing for me. I mean, Faster Way to Fat Loss here in town. That's a program. And I did it for a couple of months with the macros, and it just became a lifestyle, right? I mean, it's changed. And I'm with the back surgery that I just went through, I picked up a little bit of weight, but I've dropped it almost right back. But being on TV will motivate you to get in shape, It does. It actually,
it's motivated me to get clothes that fit better.
Yeah.
You think things are close to fitting, and then you're like, oh, wait, that looks like I'm wearing a tent.
Yeah.
I had that with some of my TV segments. And so that was my first motivation to get a coat that was actually made.
Because you have a reoccurring show on Fox, right?
So I do. I've worked at some point for 3 of the stations here locally. And when I mean worked, I mean basically volunteered for 2 of the 3. And finally, at this point, Fox 56 was, as I say, I mentioned to them, their news director was put a ring on it.
Yeah.
And said, we will commit to you, you commit to us.
Nice.
And so, it's still close to, it's still nothing that's going to, bias anything. It's just that it's just the thing that says, hey, you are important enough to us and bring enough that it's worth investing into that. And so I originally started actually broadcasting a church broadcast. I was a narrator for a church broadcast when I was 14. And then when I went to college, I wanted to work in radio. So I went to the campus station. They said I couldn't work for them because I wasn't a communications major. So instead, I went up and applied for National Public Radio at the local station and got a gig with that. And so instead of
NPR.
Broadcasting to, a few hundred people, I'm broadcasting to a catchment area of 500,000. And I created a film music show called Real Music. So I love film music, much to the chagrin of a lot of my family when I'm sitting there listening to soundtracks to, Dune and Batman and things like that.
Yeah.
So I'm not necessarily the coolest person in the world. And
Did you get into musical theater, or is it just TV?
Like soundtracks, I always felt that the soundtracks were the modern day classical music. That's where you were getting legitimate, built out composition.
That's the John Williams kind of stuff.
John Williams, Horner, Klaus Badelt, all these.
So I learned this weekend, small tidbit. John Williams' son is the lead in the band Toto. Down in Africa, right? Toto. And he also was the voice of, I think, Simba, and the musical voice of Simba in The Lion King. And he sung, You're About My Age. There was a cartoon on We Were Kids called Gummy Bears. Bouncing here. he was the singer behind that. That's John Williams' son. So it's, kind of a small musical world, but it was mind blown because, the Rains down in Africa made a huge resurgence because of Stranger Things. And they just opened for Journey here. We saw them and they were phenomenal. I was surprised at how good Toto was.
And they've been doing a lot with that. And of course, then when Pitbull decided to feature them as well.
Yeah. But his father's one of the most accomplished composers in the last 50 years.
And John Williams is a lot of what people are going to hear now are going to be off of the Hans Zimmer chain. Hans Zimmer has been very prolific at bringing up other composers.
Yeah.
And so, so those styles, and you learn those styles and where you can actually hear them and start to hear which chain people came out of.
Yeah.
Because John Williams is very much if you think of Star Wars, you think of a lot of the patriotic movies, that's going to be John Williams.
Right.
If you think more of the Hans Zimmer loves the choral aspect of things.
Okay.
Some of the choral, some of the suspense, Horner even more so in terms of some of the choral aspects of it. And so I did that. I did that show for years. In fact, I was still doing that when I came here. I probably did that show for 10 years.
On NPR?
For WETS-FM,
okay.
which is one of the local stations down there. And then we helped create the first that we know of Latin-based music program with some of the local folks there at East Tennessee State. And so I helped them produce it, learn how to do it, and put it together. Ritmo Latino. And they did a great job. And so then when I came up here, I continued to do stuff down there. I did a little 2-minute thing for public radio on some of the health and things. Nobody was really interested until I finished residency. During residency, I actually spent time up in Boston for Needham, Massachusetts, for the ABC News medical unit. And so I wrote for ABC News and did some video-based stuff, preparation for their physicians. And then when I came back, we did a little bit. But come to find out, the hospitals really don't want an emergency medicine being the spokespeople because we don't get appointments. We don't make appointments.
Gotcha.
So if I'm on TV, they can't say, "Oh, you saw Dr. Stanton. You should book an appointment with him."
I mean, it's
or
about the money.
We're not recruiting, and so there was always a little bit of tension there. Fortunately, now I work at a facility that's been uber, supportive, more than I could. I was very thankful for it, but we built this thing now working with the local stations. So every week now I'm on Fox 56 live segments. I produce a segment. The doc is in that's on 6 stations around this area of the country. Okay. And then
Are they affiliated to Fox?
No, not at all. These are all that have just been interested in our work and that we send out to. One's in Toledo. We have a couple in Arkansas, North Carolina, Western Tennessee.
So you should get with Lee Cruz. He's in 15 different stations now.
Well, he is. So Lee and I have been friends for quite a while.
Yeah.
And now he's with Fox 56.
Yeah.
They've moved their show. Lee and Haley moved there to Fox 56. And so I texted them and said, well, I guess I can be on your show now.
Yeah.
Because we always seemed to be on opposite stations.
I've been on a show a handful of times. Lee's great. And we were doing an interview 10 years ago outside of a shipping container. They were doing container homes. Mm-hmm. And we did the heating, cooling, and insulation for it. And it was when shipping container homes were a new thing. And it's like 4:00 in the morning in the ghetto. And we're shooting this. And I'm like, and the shipping container is bulletproofed because where we were waiting on the drive-by. I mean, it was a rough morning. So yeah, but I love Lee.
I don't see him out and about, and we had texted back and forth over the years about coming on and doing health stuff with him, and so now it's finally kind of aligned, and now that they've been on the station for a couple of weeks, we'll see how it all pans out with getting on there, and that's every Tuesday morning on WVLK with Jack Patty. Okay. And then I fill in because of the radio background. If they've got an opening, I'll come in and guest host shows for them on occasion.
I'm on Jack's show every other Thursday, and then I'm on Cruiser every other Wednesday. So we do home energy tips and things like that.
And I'll fill in for Cruiser and afternoon on that aspect of things. And it's not a ton, probably 3 or 4 times a year I'll get on there. A lot of times I want to talk about a lot of things, but most of the time I end up talking about healthcare the entire time, which is fine.
But it's a lot of fun. I enjoy radio.
Well, to me, it's fun because radio is very open form.
Right.
It's just like podcasting. It's open form.
Well, it's
whereas
the last
TV is very
vestige,
scripted.
but it's the last vestige of journalism, right? Talk radio and now podcast, which is independent, right? But I mean, we get to talk about things that we want to talk about. And, so many people in the world of journalism, they've got, bills to pay, I mean, there was in my industry, a semi-famous situation a couple of years ago. One of the larger HVAC companies in the state of Kentucky got fined by the attorney general $700,000 for deceptive business practices. Well, no major TV station reported it. It didn't make the air. And it's because they spend $50,000 a month on TV advertising. So there's a certain amount of pay for play in this world.
And there's some protections that are out there. I've seen that with universities. When there's or even other hospitals or other larger groups, that pay to play, that it definitely does impact.
Yeah.
Back when I was working for other stations, there was a big story that came up, and they're like, we're going to stay clear of that because their administration won't like it. Yeah. And that's a challenge. That
it's not journalism,
and it's not, and that's where sometimes the national is big, but even you sometimes see it on the national stage too. But sometimes it's better with the national level because they are large enough.
Right.
The problem, people think there's money in media. There's not. Mm-hmm. The reason I've got a producer that I work with, and he's asked me before why I didn't go into media. I'm like, there was no market for a 6'5" Southern white guy. And, I'm tall, got a little bit of an accent, not as much that I can have. And, it's just not and just seeing the people that I worked with as a production assistant that had these expectations to work 3 a.m. until noon every day, or 4 p.m. until midnight. Mm-hmm. And the one that changed everything. I was working at WJHL TV in East Tennessee, Johnson City. So a 106, I think it's a 106 market, maybe a 150. I can't remember, but it's not a small market, not one of the largest either. And she was making at that point about $16,900 for the year.
Wow,
working horrible hours, and she had to make ends meet. She lived basically in the attic of her parents' garage and had to still borrow money from them for the clothing, because the expectation is you're still going to have different clothing. Right. And that is one of the awful aspects that still exist in local media, is the fact that if you're female talent and you wear the same thing within a month or two, somebody will call it out.
Really?
Whereas I can go, sad. I've got 3 or 4 coats, and 5 or 6 shirts, and I just mix them up.
Yeah.
Nobody says a thing.
Yeah.
But it's, the whole idea that you have to get hands down into one of the top 50 markets and be a primary player on one of those markets to make it financially.
Yeah.
And so that's why so many people in East Tennessee and here are washout markets, where you see folks that finally discover that it's not going to be their life. This is not the dream.
Right.
And so they move into PR stuff, into media relations stuff, into outside areas.
In our market, it seems like the people that you get on the air, they stay there forever.
The few that do.
Yeah.
So you have your anchor, you have your key core anchors and meteorologists that are there, usually in the evenings, that are going to be your people that are there forever.
Let's say we have 3 meteorologists in Lexington that have been on the air as long as I can remember.
Mm-hmm. And East Tennessee was the same way.
Yeah.
They've got one that is still on the air down there that was on the air when I moved there in the mid-1980s, and doesn't look any different. Same thing, same stuff there. And their sports person has been that same way.
Yeah.
Their primary anchors came in when I was in med school. They're still there. I think one's about to retire. And that happens because that's a good enough. They're making enough to fit that economy that they're in.
Well, and the cost of living here is relatively inexpensive. Mm-hmm. I did see a report last week that a family of 4 needs to average $199,000 a year in the state of Kentucky to live well, to be upper middle class. That's the threshold. And we were the 3rd lowest, and we were Arkansas and Mississippi were lower than us. But other than that, I think every other place was more expensive.
Almost everything we talk about is, education or whatever. It's thank God for Mississippi and West Virginia.
Yeah.
because you have to have, you say, well, at least we're not 50.
Yeah.
I mean, and the cool thing now is, of course, with the consideration of Washington, D.C., is you can even be 51.
Yeah.
Which is a little bit painful.
So I'm the largest solar company in the state. We sell solar panels. And, somebody told me one time, you literally got in an industry in a coal state and we're 47th, 48th in the nation with solar adoption. And I always tell people, I said, but that's a lot of opportunity, right? Less than 1% of the homes in Kentucky have solar panels. That means 99% are potential clients.
And no matter what, you're going to either come in too early or too late.
Yeah.
If there's very few people just strike it that they hit at just the right time. And ideally, you want to be on the up of too early. Enough that you're going to struggle a little bit just as it builds up, but then you're established and in a good position when it takes off. Because what happens a lot of times, we'll just say our ultrasound, emergency department ultrasound, one of the greatest educators and teachers that I knew of, and early adopters of ED-based point-of-care ultrasound, is one of the physicians that was one of the investors in the castle, he and his family. And his timing was impeccable, and we hired him in here from his fellowship to Lexington, and he just caught it at just the right time. But if you get into it now, there's thousands in that space.
Yeah.
And so you really can't jump in now just because there's that opportunity. You're late to the game. Yeah. So can you figure out what's going to be next? I mean, the benefit to a company like this with looking at solar is, one, we've got bigger problems if the sun doesn't come up each day. So it's the ultimate in terms of renewable resources. But the coal industry with the restrictions, the EPA, the character of Eastern Kentucky coal versus the character of Western Kentucky coal, which does tend to have, if I remember correctly, the Western Kentucky coal
much
is
cleaner,
much cleaner, less sulfur.
Most of the coal that we burn in Kentucky comes out of Wyoming. They have a coal mine there that's bigger than the state of Rhode Island, and it's one of the cleanest mines. I think it's called the Cheyenne, but it's one of the cleanest mines in America. So that's where the bulk of our coal comes from. And
I think that one of the biggest challenges we have is we feel like that we need to go all in on one solution, whereas the key to an energy, it's really truly a portfolio.
For sure.
What are the options you have based on where you live? I mean, if you live on some place that has zero wind, I actually heard you talking about this on the radio last week.
Yeah.
In a different way. But if you have some place that has zero wind, there's no reason to have windmills.
Yeah.
But if you have a place that it rains 300 days a year, solar is going to be difficult.
The perfect portfolio, in my opinion, right now is natural gas, solar, and nuclear. If you have the three of those in a proper mix, that's going to be, because we've got 200 years of natural gas in the ground in the United States. We're the Saudi Arabia of natural gas. It burns relatively clean. It doesn't have a lot of greenhouse emissions. That's why natural gas is taking over coal. Solar is not taking over coal. Natural gas is. And the utility companies are invested in natural gas. So now they control the supply and the demand. That's kind of a scary place for our future. Our business is unique because solar is we call our business a three-legged stool. So we're HVAC, we're solar, and we're whole house. We do generators and insulation and other things. But, I'm 10 years in business doing solar in this market, and we were one of the first. I counted the other day, there have been 12 companies to start solar companies and go bankrupt in the 10 years that I've continued to grow and be successful. And the reality is, solar is still new in Kentucky. You've got your early adopters, and that comes in waves, So a couple of years ago, when interest rates were down around 2%, these companies were really aggressive in financing solar, getting people to take 25-year loans out, which is absurd. You don't want to buy 25 years to pay on anything. But when the interest rates went up, that business model failed, and they collapsed, and they left a whole lot of people hanging. And there's several attorney general lawsuits, class action suits. There's people going to jail over that. They were misleading people. And there's a company the other side of Harrodsburg. A state electrical inspector called me, and he said, "Hey, I've got this little old lady who just put this solar array, and I'm about to approve it, and I'm looking at this contract, and it feels wrong." He shows me a picture of it, and he says, "What would you have charged for this array?" I said, "Probably about $25,000. He shows me a picture of the contract, $93,000. They hit this woman with $30,000 in finance fees.
And so the key is the beauty of having the internet now is you can look up a lot of this stuff, but the challenge is knowing how to do it.
What staggers me is I'll be driving down the road and I'll see a residential solar job like near my house that they put 30 or 40 panels on and they didn't even quote us. And I'm like, I'm the largest contractor in the state. I live down the street from you. My office is in the middle of town and you just spent $50,000, $60,000 and you didn't get a bid from me. And most of the time it's these door-to-door salespeople that literally won't leave your house without signing a contract. I mean, we interviewed a guy that came from one of them and they trained him to not leave unless you're kicked out. Like that's part of his training. I don't want to live that way.
Well, I can tell you right now, if you come to my house, that you will be kicked out. Not you personally, but if you cold call me, it's just like when my phone rings and it's spam. It's going to be ignored. If you come to my house, knock on my door, try to sell me something, we will have a stern discussion that may involve some sarcasm and
sadly they're taking advantage of people that aren't as socially aware as you are.
Well, it's not even being socially aware. It's just, it's our home is theoretically now, as technology has advanced, we have less and less private space.
Yeah.
Our car is no longer a private space. Workplace, definitely not a private space. Your work week is not 5 days a week anymore.
No,
you're
always available
accessible
to everybody.
And, I've had to turn off some of the social media related work stuff for the American College of Emergency Physicians. I have to stop looking at it at 5 p.m.
Yeah.
If I even look at it before that, just because it was getting up my blood pressure, getting me frustrated, getting me distracted. Yeah. And not to say I'm distracted enough already, but it's your home is your private space.
I'm making a conscious effort to keep my phone in my pocket when I go to lunch or dinner with somebody. Mm-hmm. And it's a challenge because, we've been sitting here for a little less than an hour and my phone's probably rang 6 times. And most of the people who know and love me know exactly where I am and they're not calling me. That's 6 other people. But if I go to lunch with you or somewhere else, especially the business lunch, everybody sits their phone right beside their plate. And I'm like, we're not being present. I watched a YouTube video with Simon Sinek today, and he was talking about the lack of being present with our family, much less a lunch. So it is and it's going to be a hard goal for me,
I've got 5 people that could call right now and my phone will ring.
Right. Because you got it locked down.
I have it turned off. Yeah. I have it turned, but my wife calls, my daughters call, my parents call, her parents call. It'll ring through. And that's how I run 24/7. And then everything else it just vibrates. At night, interestingly, and if you're a spammer out there and you take advantage of this, I will find you. But at night, I turn off everything, all notifications except the ringer, because my work with Lexington Fire.
Oh yeah, needs to wake you up.
If they call for online medical control, I want it to ring through. So I want to be
able to respond. Are you just
a
consultant, or do you actually physically go out at times?
I do go out, not from my house. By the time I responded from Jessamine County, it would be something. Hopefully, would have sorted out by then. There's there's guardrails on our paramedics that are established by the state, and if you want to deviate from a protocol or outside that, you have to have online medical control.
Okay.
And that's why it's contacting a physician. Now, we can do that through the hospitals, and they do that through the hospitals. But if it's something, such as a cardiac arrest or a difficult behavioral health situation, a lot of times they'll call me to sort through the situation and see what the next steps need to be, and kind of working through that legal and ethical aspect of what we need to do for those people. So they'll call me. I don't get a lot of calls per week anymore because we now have an EMS supervisor position called 241, which is an incredible addition that they take care of a lot of it. But like today, I got a call middle of the day, paramedic requesting information on a scene that they were on and what they needed to do next. And so I help them walk through it. And then they can document that online medical control, Dr. Stanton says this. And then that was the decision that was made based on it. And
now, how does that impact you from a liability standpoint?
So every entity that you work with as a physician, you need to have coverage. So my coverage for Lexington Fire is through the city. So your malpractice risk exposure. When I'm working in the emergency department, it's through my employer. When I'm working with NASCAR and with motorsports, it's through GMR. So it's whoever your covering entity is going to be. And that's one thing physicians have to be aware of. And that's why you don't see physicians jumping out at every single car accident. We usually do a drive-by triage. I see, of course, if it's in Lexington, I'm stopping just because I'm going to know the people. But if it's somewhere else, I'll do a drive-by triage. I will look and see if somebody needs help. If EMS and fire are already there, most of the time I'm not going to worry about it because the experts for that area are there. But if they need help, if there looks like there's going to be something, I will of course get out and try to help out. But it's that scene triage, because almost all healthcare professionals now are, if you look around right now, you don't see billboards of physicians willing to just help, just to.
No, everybody's afraid to death of Morgan and Morgan.
Yeah, well, that's it. There's every other, and in fact, Lexington has a lower percentage of ambulance chasing and lawyer based billboards. We have a lot. If you go outside, you're looking at southeastern Kentucky. It's every single one of them is some form of trial lawyer, and there's a fear out there right now with healthcare professionals that if I help,
there should be.
I'm going to be held responsible. Now there are Good Samaritan laws, but Kentucky is not one of the greatest places to protect, because then they say, well, you have a duty to act because you're a physician. And so with that duty to act means you have the responsibility and thus the risk exposure. And so I'm probably a little bit more willing to jump out than most just because of who I work with here, especially in Lexington. But with others, it's kind of like the idea of you never have your stethoscope visible in your car.
Right.
You never put on the license plate that you're a physician.
It's crazy to train there. I mean, you're trained by that, by your insurance carrier, right? I heard a Morgan & Morgan commercial on the radio the other day, and I was surprised by the statistic. 1/3 of their clients are repeat clients. I'm like, that's scary, right? I mean, that's people that are out there. That's the people that eat 3/4 of their meal and ask for the manager to comp the meal because they're not happy with it. I mean, that's a culture, right? We talk about it being the gig economy. I tell people all the time, it's not the gig economy, it's the scam economy. I get 50 emails a day of people trying to scam my business in one way. They want to take over our marketing, or they want to sell us leads. Yeah, they're all scams. I mean, like 99% of them are scams. But you're talking about your liability and when you're under different umbrellas. My wife's family's in insurance, and they're from Hazard, Kentucky, and they've owned the Hazard Insurance Agency since 1914. And I was licensed for about a decade and just didn't have a lot of passion in it. But one of the accounts that I wrote, Lexington has a unique situation with our police department. Your police department, the police officer are allowed to do private security as a police officer. But a cop is a cop 24/7, right? So like if you're in your cruiser and you're off duty and you respond, you still have the protection of the umbrella of being a cop. So when you're private security, who takes over, right? Whose liability? And they actually had to write a unique policy for this market. And if the police officer touches you or they touch their weapon, they are immediately a cop. If they don't touch those two things, they're private. So there is a clear line of whose liability kicks in where. And it was actually written for Lexington. So it's pretty cool.
And the problem with medicine is that it's kind of like the rats on a ship. If all the rats start jumping off, as soon as there is a lawsuit involved, everybody tries to pin it on you and everybody tries to get out.
Right.
Your insurance tries to get out. The hospital's going to try to pin it on you. Your group may try to pin it on you. That's the problem we see is you feel like that mistakes happen.
Right.
I mean, if I only made a mistake on 0.1% of my patients, then I would still make a mistake on somewhere around 40 patients a year, 30 to 40 patients.
Wow.
Make a mistake. So, 1% would be somewhere around 200 to 300, 300 to 400, because I see probably around 3,000 to 4,000 patients per year. And so, the problem is the expectation of perfection.
Yeah. Because nobody's perfect,
they
right?
expect,
I mean, you're a human.
In healthcare, they expect you to be perfect all the time. And that is the expectation for a physician. And it's simply the case. There's things you're not going to pick up. There's pieces of information that aren't going to be transmitted. There's going to be a piece that's not found. And honestly, bad things happen to wonderful people. The simple fact is 100% of us, everybody says that the only guarantees are death and taxes. I know a lot of people who skip out on taxes, but I don't know anybody who skips out on that last day.
No.
And unfortunately, things just happen. And, that until the culture understands that you have humans caring for humans and the unique things that happen on each
There's got to be a legal system to protect you in doing that, right?
And I believe there should be responsibility for gross negligence, and when you're truly, like right now, if
But that's
I went
medical tribunals, right? I mean, that's the direction other states are going.
some are, and nothing like that passes in Kentucky. It gets shot down by the Supreme Court every time it passes.
Well, and that's because we have so many lobbyists representing the trial lawyers.
Well, and the fact that the Constitution is written in a way that says no person's day in court will be denied, which is great. Everybody deserves their day in court, but also for a reasonable ask.
Yeah, people take advantage.
And the one thing folks don't understand is when a physician is sued, that is reportable the rest of your career.
Yeah.
Like, well, you just paid out. It's not a big deal. It's $10,000, $20,000, whatever. That's reportable on every license, on every renewal that you have the rest of your life. So just imagine if you're out there right now and you got a speeding ticket and you had to report that speeding ticket on every job application, on anything that you ever did, that you got that ticket. Well, that ticket now is something that significantly restricts my ability to do my job.
Right.
And
liability insurance, the premiums and all that stuff.
And a lot of times the trial lawyers will look and see if you have prior speeding tickets.
Yeah.
Because it's the likelihood of getting sued increases exponentially once you've been sued.
Yeah.
And so, unfortunately, it's that very litigious society that we live in. And that's why when you go to the emergency department now, you're not getting exactly what you need. You're getting exactly what you need, plus all the things we need to do
to protect your
cover, to CYA.
Yeah, CYA.
And I still remember one of my favorite patients I ever had came in and said, "I'm a trial lawyer. Do exactly what I need to do, not what you think you need to do to protect you from me. I'm not going to sue you.
Just get that in writing.
Just do what I need."
Yeah.
Well, theoretically, it's already in writing.
Right.
Every single time you go to the hospital, you sign something about the fact that you're not going to sue.
Yeah.
And it means nothing. And so you live every day, and that's probably one of the main reasons of burnout is every time you see a patient, you think, okay, what does a patient need?
Well, an ER is a different level of burnout, right? I mean, you guys are much more fast-paced than people who are in calmer professions.
Well, the highest areas of burnout in medicine are intensive care, so intensivist, ICU, and emergency medicine.
Yeah.
Just because it is high-paced, lots of bad things to good people, that are just happening out there, and it's just it's constantly pulling at you a little bit. And my wife says that you don't get emotional enough sometimes, and I'm like, well, a lot of that is just that self-protection.
Yeah.
It's that that should have upset you. Well, it didn't, just because I have to deal with that every day. I have to run a code on a young person who comes in dying and then immediately go into the next room and act like nothing's happened.
Yeah, that's tough.
And so it's a complete reset. And I have to have somebody threaten my life and say they're going to come after me and my family, and then go into the next room and act like nothing's happened. And so you really can't have an emotional commitment, in that environment, because if you do, we wouldn't survive 5 years.
You're going to be empty. Yeah. I mean, you should try running a small business. It's similar, having 30 mouths to feed and worry about, who's doing what. And, we had a conversation today. The customers aren't the hard part. 20% of our stress is customer related. It's 80% employees, people not showing up because they worked hard yesterday and they were too tired to get out of bed this morning, but we've got commitments, to do. But, just struggling with different personality types, it is, my wife calls me the vampire because nothing gets under my skin. So I'm 30 years in doing this and 30 years of managing people. I know you're triaging, so you're at a different heightened level, but there's similar stressors there, and, when something happens with my kids, I'm much less likely to be reactive because I've had 30 years of employees teaching me how to teach those people younger than me. And I don't treat my kids like employees, but I'm more responsive than reactive. I'll not have that emotional reaction that maybe she's a little bit more inclined to do. It sounds like you're in a similar setup, because that third of a second that it takes you to think about it and process it to respond versus react, that's an extremely valuable measurement of time.
In mine, for me, the emotional aspect comes with efficiency. If I don't feel like things are going the way I expect or want them to go, I'll get worked up.
Yeah.
I do have a temper. But, it really, as long as things are, if I can see, I want to think, that's the idea that I always say of a pilot. A pilot's not thinking about what's happening now. A pilot's thinking about 5 or 6 steps down the road. I have to think about what's going to be the next radio transmission, the weather, the approach, whatever it's going to be. And that's the way medicine is. If you're thinking out this far, and this is the process that needs to happen. And so whether it's family or whether it's, if as long as things go the course they're supposed to go, but it's when you throw something, an inefficiency or an acute change in there, that's when you start getting, you start getting a little bit fired up. And for me, and if it's in the hospital, if I get fired up in the hospital, it's because I feel like that the patient's not getting the care and the efficiency that they need. If I hate waiting, I hate people that have to wait in the waiting room. That's just a natural thing. There's more people now that need emergency services than ever, and the brick and mortar is not expanding that fast, and we don't have the staff to do it. And so people waiting just gets under my skin so bad. When there's, you've ordered and you've done these 5 hours worth of workups, and we still don't have the urine sample.
Which is the simplest thing to do.
Somebody at 86 has not gone 5 hours without having to use the bathroom at this point.
Yeah.
Or the blood continues to hemolyze. Those inefficiencies will get me frustrated. And because maybe it's the time when I went through residency, I was learned that each of those patients is my responsibility, and it's a piece of me that has to be there. And so just act like you're treating a family member or whoever. And so every patient that I see, I get frustrated if it doesn't go as efficiently. If I was on the other side, what would I be feeling or seeing? What would I be experiencing? Because people, as a doctor, I'm seeing 30, 40 patients a day. Everything's moving quickly. I'm going one room to the other, and then back and forth, and honestly, spending most of the time on the computer, doing all the computer work. But when you're sitting in that room, it's just you, and you're going 2 hours without seeing anybody. And those 2 hours feel like a week. And, sometimes you forget that the time, the sensation of time is very different from the staff than it is to the patient, to the families.
Oh, yeah, I'm sure.
And if it's somebody who's truly sick, I get it. Where the frustration comes is the person who comes in with a non-emergency and is frustrated. It's frustrated that it's been 20 minutes that they have not immediately been seen, gotten exactly what they want. Now I want a turkey sandwich while I'm at it, and all of these other things. And those are those outside stressors that you have when you're dealing with some of the worst situations for people, and then those that may not have that worst situation.
Yeah. So we're running long, so I wanted to close. I've been wanting to ask you this. Obviously, you've led an exciting life, right? I mean, the NASCAR thing is just cool. Being an ER doctor in itself has been cool. What's your best story? I'm sure you've got a good story that's public friendly that you can close our podcast with.
Well, there's all kinds of ER based stories. One of my favorites, and statute of limitations too, is walking through as a resident, because this wasn't even my patient, looking over and seeing an arrow sticking out of a person's forehead.
Oh wow!
The hunting season, an arrow was just sticking out every time they'd move around.
That's crazy.
There's all kinds of those healthcare stories, but. My first race as medical director of NASCAR was the Daytona 500 that Ryan Newman wrecked. And so my wife and family, we had gone there to the Daytona 500. I was serving as an administrative role, and the race was rained out. Trump had come in, he was there, so security's really high. Air Force One, all the things. And we were there Sunday. It got rained out. So Monday we had to come back for them to go to school. And so we flew back Monday, and I'd just gotten back to the house, and we'd missed stage 1 and stage 2. We got home just in time for stage 3. And so watching it, and they come around, the white flag comes out, and I stand up because I know something's going to happen. It's not if. They almost always at Daytona and Talladega, somebody wrecks on the last lap. I'm more surprised if they don't.
Yeah.
And they come around, and I see that wreck, and I see the car hit right on the roof, and it's on its top, and you see this liquid dripping down. I thought it was fuel, but it's actually the oil. and thinking it's about to catch on fire. And our team running up there to the vehicle, and they put up the blinders, the screens there. And I'm watching this all on TV as it unfolds. And, I sit there and I'm thinking, and I'm texting with our paramedic, our extra paramedic who's inside the wall, telling me what they're doing and what's happening. And, you're starting to see videos popping up on social media from people in the stands that were shooting down at it. And I sat there thinking, my first race as the medical director for NASCAR, and we've killed a driver.
Oh, yeah.
And this may be the shortest tenure of medical director that's ever existed in NASCAR. My one race that I had, thankfully, Mr. Newman did fine, recovered. Video of him walking out of the hospital a couple days later with his two daughters, barefoot. I don't know if it's barefoot or socks, which kind of surprised me. I don't know if he knows what's on the floors of those hospitals, but I would have definitely worn shoes. But walking out with that and then kind of moving from there. And, to me, that was just one of those moments, just standing there watching, because I couldn't do anything about it.
Yeah.
But I'm getting this behind the scenes information of what's happening, what's going on with everything. And then I wasn't able to talk to the doctor and the paramedic that were there until well after that, what they saw, what they experienced, what happened, what went well, what did not. And so that one's an interesting one that everybody can actually go back and watch that video of that wreck and that recovery.
Man, Daytona has just had some awful wrecks,
Daytona has.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite track?
Night racing at Bristol. I love Bristol. Half mile, 30-degree banking, fastest half mile in the world. I love the experience, the people at Talladega. Their medical folks are just wonderful human beings. We do a low country boil on Saturday nights before the Sunday race. Daytona, just the environment of the track and everything there and the history. Going down to the North Turn, which is a eatery, a bar and grill that is where the old North Turn of the beach-based track used to be.
Oh, cool.
Not incredibly great food, but it's a great experience, great environment.
Nostalgia.
It's nostalgia. And so, just different things. And what my favorite thing about traveling, so I typically do, especially since COVID, do about 20 to 25 race weekends per year, not just NASCAR, but other events. But just going to these tracks and these environments, I have a policy that we are not, unless it's the only option, no chain restaurants, nothing I can get at home. And so trying to experience the local
That's how
food
we vacation.
and entertainment and breweries and things like that. And my wife does a fantastic job with that too. We went to DC and we were there for 5 days, and each lunch and dinner had to be a different nationality. So we have 10 different nationalities.
That's how we roll.
And
exactly.
I love that aspect of things. And
hey, if I'm on vacation, I'm here to eat and drink, right? I'm going to see cool stuff and I'm going to eat and drink. Mm-hmm. It's part of the experience.
That's exactly what we do in the experience. And to me, that hands down the hardest thing about the traveling and the motorsports is being away from family.
Yeah, for sure.
It's being and not being part of that daily life that they have.
Well, and just being a worker, right? I mean, you're probably working. I work 60 hours a week every week. I had back surgery and I took one day off, right? Because I've got so many people that depend on me, and the accessibility, the phones.
Mm-hmm.
Saturday night at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, I'm getting a call somebody's air conditioning's not working. I've got an emergency after hours service that you can call and get to that person, but they've got my cell number in their phone, so they're going to call me. And of course I answer, but the family suffers.
I'm just going to text you.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, just think right now, for everybody listening, watching, 1/3 of your emergency physicians and emergency nurses are going to work whatever night and weekend that you're on right now. So coming up right now on Memorial Day weekend, 1/3 of all of them will be working.
Yeah.
And covering that. I work 50% of every holidays. Okay. So if I work Thanksgiving, I may be off Christmas. If I'm working Christmas, I may be off New Year's.
Wow.
But about 50%, and that's your nurses, your doctors, your techs, everybody. They're working about 1/3 to 50% of all holiday weekends. 47% of my shifts have to be on a Friday, Saturday, or Sunday. This weekend, fortunate enough, I'm off Saturday, Sunday. I am working Monday and Tuesday, which I will pay for being off Saturday and Sunday by working emergency department on Memorial Day and the day after Memorial Day.
Yeah.
And that's one thing that folks don't necessarily realize with emergency medicine, a lot of that burnout, is that to make a hospital functional 24/7, 365 takes a lot of human beings.
That's a really good way to close this out, because, we've focused on the cool part of your job, but there's a very human element to what you do, and not just you, all the other folks that are there with you, and doctors and nurses are people too. And I think a lot of times when people are in those situations, they think you're there to serve them, which in a way you are, but at the same time, you're a human being with family and feelings and emotion and other things. So I think that's a really poignant way to close out our time together.
Well, that should be, anything that you do, realize the folks that are serving you at a restaurant or working at hotels, whatever it may be, those are human beings with lives and challenges and difficulties. And sure, we have an expectation for service. And when I go out to a restaurant, I have an expectation for the quality of food, for the quality of service, for the attentiveness. But understanding that you are seeing that human being in a snapshot of time and not taking the entire picture of what's going on in their lives, what's stressing them, the difficulties they've had in that shift, the person that just hijacked 3 hours of their shift and then stiffed them on a tip. There's the complexities of what's going on, and that even though you come to my door and try to sell me something, I'll kick you off. But, everywhere else, with those people, treating humans as human beings and being respectful and understanding the total picture. And no matter where it is, no matter what you're doing, I'm fortunate enough to get paid well to be a physician. Now, there was a lot of money invested in getting there, but most people out there right now are not getting paid enough for what they're doing and for the pressures that they're under. And so for us as humans, I think one thing that we may have lost some during COVID in the current political climate is how do we treat each other, and how do we empathy and supporting each other, and understanding that if I can do one thing today, it's hopefully make one person's day better, one person's life better. And so I think, if we all do that, everybody's life's getting a little bit better.
Yeah. It's kindness, pass it on, right? I mean, there's a really good phrase.
Pay it forward.
Yeah. Well, I want to thank you for coming. It's been great. I've enjoyed sitting down and get to know you a little better, and I hope our listeners and viewers got to know you a little bit. You've got the doctor is in. That's Tuesdays on Fox 56 in the morning.
Well, so Tuesday morning is WVLK at 6:45.
Okay.
I call in, talk with Jack, and we'll just cover whatever's hot that day. The Fox 56 is going to be either Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, one of them, or two of them, depending. It's based on how many guests they have in place. There's a cooking special on Monday, so we let them have that. But I'll be one of those days this week. Usually I put it on there. You can follow along. There's the doc is in on Facebook, Everyday Med on X. There's also Stanton MD, where I transition everything there. If you're medical and interested in medical topics, we have the ACEP Frontline podcast, which is a weekly podcast. ACEP Frontline, ACEP Frontline. You can just look at Frontline Stanton. And we have a weekly, and that's going to be emergency medicine, acute care based. So healthcare folks out there, it's fantastic for that. Had about 600,000 downloads last year.
That's impressive.
52 episodes. So pretty excited about that. And we've get a lot of interest and support from, CDC and FDA and others, trying to get information out there. So occasional podcasts, but really focusing on community-based emergency medicine and acute care.
Cool. Well, that's all the time we have today. Thank you for watching Lexington Behind the Curtain, and we'll see you next time for episode 10. And thank you, Dr. Stanton.
Absolutely.